now that we've heard two speakers, one talking about Muslim extremism and the other one talking about far-right extremism, I think it's a good time now to bring on our next guest speaker, Laura Pidcock from Show Racism the Red Card, who is an anti-racism facilitator. I've worked with Laura many times in the past and Show Racism the Red Card, and I really do admire their work. And she works in schools in the Northeast educating against sort of racism and anti-Muslim hatred. Now, I hope that she's going to talk a little bit about what racism actually means, what it means to be a racist, and to talk a little bit about anti-Muslim hatred and what that entails, basically. So, and maybe bring some of her experiences working in the schools and some of the solutions that she thinks are going to be suitable for discussing this topic of extremism. So I would like to bring Laura to the podium to talk about that, please. Thanks.
Thanks very much. So I am an anti-racism education worker and spend quite a lot of my time in classrooms, and not just classrooms, sometimes informal settings as well. Just a tiny bit about Show Racism the Red Card. We are an anti-racism education charity set up in the Northeast here in 1996. The aim of the organisation is to utilise the high-profile status of ex-sporting stars, of which we have one at the back of the room, Trevor Benjamin, give us a wave. And we use that kind of high-profile status to convey an anti-racism message within the classroom, not to be confused with trying to kick racism out of football, but trying to kick racism out of society using the vehicle of football. So that kind of differentiates us from other movements like Kick It Out. I really appreciated Andy Sykes talking about a safe space, and that's something that we definitely work hard to do. Young people need the space to air their concerns about the world that they see around them. And working with 50,000 people every year, this gives us a really unique insight into what are the grievances of young people and adults, and lets us have a constant picture of what racism looks like in our country. And that's useful when we're trying to find the antidote and the solutions to kind of unpick those prejudices. So the theme of anti-Muslim hatred, it is absolutely present in our workshops and dominant in the rhetoric of the far right. People who are Muslim or perceived to be Muslim are portrayed as a terrorist threat, as having one culture, a culture which is fixed, fundamental, and not only being a threat to the British way of life, but completely incompatible with British culture. Cases of sexual exploitation involving men who have Asian heritage are perceived to have Asian heritage and therefore assumed to be Muslim, are often reported on in an extremely irresponsible way, framing the debate of abuse as being something inherent to this supposed culture rather than as a result of patriarchal or sexist societies. We know that if young people are not given the space to acknowledge and celebrate their own culture, they may not even realise that they have one. So when they're, confronted with a culture which is framed as totally opposed to theirs, it seems as though it's a threat. A threat not only to them and their identity, but also to their community. We challenge young people to think about their identity and what it is to be British. We provide information that refutes the populist myths about people who are Muslim. People who are consistently stereotyped, negating the vast diversity of the almost 1.7 billion people identifying with the faith. It's been mentioned briefly before, but high-profile cases like the horrific actions of the two men who murdered drummer Lee Rigby, the actions quite clearly barbaric, only serve to be like a lit match to a barrel of petrol. I found out quite a lot about my friends when I looked at my Facebook feed just after that incident. Statuses with kill them all, ship them back, shoot the lot of them appear and whip up hatred for anybody who is perceived to be part of this supposed group. Even the BBC's Nick Robinson played his part in compounding these crude stereotypes when he stated that the men in the attack were of Muslim appearance. I mean, what does that even mean? Perhaps it was a clumsy requote, but it was nonetheless damaging that there is one idea of what it is to be Muslim. And this is the tide that we are absolutely swimming against. And unless we have a generation of young people who are critical of everything, they will passively accept these myths and untruths. What seems to be even more concerning to me in the classroom is the absolute inability to separate Muslim with foreign. And therefore, when there is a Muslim person who does something wrong, the idea of our country being a multicultural one is called into question. It only takes barbaric actions of one to call into question a whole system, and we don't see this same crisis narrative when we hear about somebody from a majority community who does something equally as barbaric. And to add complexity to this already quite complex issue, as I mentioned briefly earlier, immigration and foreign are one and the same thing. Muslim and foreign are one and the same thing, and vice versa. The fact that there are many, many British Muslims, and have been for many hundreds of years, is often neglected in arguments about what it is to be British. When we consider attitudes towards immigration, we start to see that there's a very, very dangerous attitude base which contributes towards anti-Muslim rhetoric. Very often participants in our workshop are totally confused and really shocked to find out that there actually can be legal immigrants, because all they've ever heard of are illegal immigrants. And there's a sense that if people are allowed to enter a country, that they're automatically afforded more rights and more privileges over people who are born in the country just by the very fact that they've crossed a border. Some young people, and it's certainly not a sentiment exclusive to young people, are adamant that immigrants get given priority in the jobs market, in the housing market, that they are privy to freedoms and rights over and above those born in this country. And they're just generally having a better time here in this country. So, to some of the supposed remedies for this situation, and what I'm about to convey in this room might not be a popular sentiment, but please bear with me. When we have a young person in a workshop sitting in front of us, sometimes saying really unpalatable things that make you wince and recoil, I have to try and work out and say to myself, what is this young person really saying? What are they really trying to communicate to me? Take, for example, some things that you've probably heard many, many times before, but young people say this often. How come they get more benefits than us? How come they get to get a house? My mum's been waiting in the housing queue for years. What this young person is really saying is, why is my life not good? Why do I have no opportunities afforded to me? Why have we got no money? When we hear these very unpalatable things and see this really extreme behaviour, I would ask us to instead ask what is wrong with them, ask what is wrong with us. What is wrong with a society which has been created and a system where people are not rejecting the mainstream narrative, not even questioning what is out in the mainstream? What is wrong with a system which marginalises people to the extent where the English Defence League are giving people a home, that are giving them something to do? What is wrong with a society that is so influenced by the power of a single story? So I want you to imagine that you're 15. You're not doing very well at school, you're poor, your worldview has been constructed by information taken from The Sun, the Daily Mail, Facebook, Sky News. You're living in a country where there's 2.52 million people out of work. Your parents are being taxed on the spare room they have. You don't have many opportunities. And somebody comes along and tells you a story of a Polish immigrant or a Muslim person living down the street from you. And they're getting more than you. They got a house quicker than you. Somebody's just given them a mobile phone and they've got a really, really posh car. Your worldview is telling you that this is really, really unfair. I would find that unfair if I was that 15-year-old. Never mind the fact that all of that might have been completely fabricated. We must capture the anger of young people and adults and provide an alternative view. We must ask people to search for the real reasons behind their conditions and frustrations, having empathy and understanding, creating an environment where all answers will be questioned, where a single story will not have power, it will not work, it will not sway me because it's a single story, it's one example, where we look for the real root of our conditions is the only way that I believe that we can counter not only anti-Muslim hatred, but all prejudice. I want to say that having an understanding of this is by no means giving justification to racist ideas and attitudes. It's not. But it means that we can search for an explanation and in turn search for solutions and fundamentally change attitudes. And I want to end with the words of Martin Luther King, so I don't think anyone can argue with him. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Thanks very much for listening.